I'm going to invite our next keynote speaker, Mr. Benjamin Grossman, CEO, Pinpoint Payments. A very warm welcome to you, Benjamin.
I would try. I think the only non-Indian member in the jury. So what I'd like to reflect to you is my experience, professional experience, when we are working, for example, with Israeli companies, as an example, when they are on the process of collaboration or do some kind of a legal engagement with the Indian counterparts. And I'm in that business for the last 20 years almost, but still I detect some challenges and some easy points which I'd like to share with you. I'm a legal consultant dealing with Israel and India for the last 20 years, since 2001. I'm part of a law firm called APM & Co, and we are very strong in TMT and other issues, other sectors which are very relevant to India. And we have worked on many transactions in the last 20 years, starting with the defense, and then we moved on to many other sectors. I start with the ease of legal work with the non-Indian players. I just want to share with you my experience, not necessarily the ultimate one or the objective one, just sharing what I felt. So first of all, we are sharing the same language, which is very comfortable, and also it's a little tricky because in some cases the meaning of language is slightly different, how the Israeli percept English word in the Indian. So take that into consideration. We have a very common basis of legal systems. We both started from the British system. Both countries have very strong and independent legal institutions. I know that if I have to go to court in India, I'll get a fair chance to protect the interest of my client. So I don't think there's any kind of a bias or things like that. There is availability of very good qualified lawyers at all levels on the Indian side. And also when we are coming to the economics, I learned to know that rates are similar, and also the billing methodologies are similar. So in that sense, it's very easy to get some kind of a collaboration with the other side. We can assess the cost and so on. And also the time zones is very comfortable. We are now in Israel now, it's 8:30. So when we start 8 o'clock, we have enough people on the other side, and we don't have to run talks in the middle of the night like we have to do when we are working with the US. But there are some challenges when we have to convince or to give peace of mind to our clients when they're coming to India, and they are expecting us to go with them hand by hand and ease all the challenges and address it to them. So first of all, there are still some FDI restrictions. Bear in mind that many deals are in the defense sectors, and this is something that it's not. I mean, it's something that we can resolve, but it's not straightforward. The registration of new company in India is still long and complex. Now in the COVID, it's even more complex because we have to get some physical access, things like that. It takes time, and it's much more complicated. It's longer than how it's done in Israel or even in the US. The same about opening a bank account. I have some cases when I have to wait almost a year to open an active bank account. Lots of issues, anti-laundering issues, RBI, lots of work. I mean, it's good for the billing sheet for us, but it creates some kind of reluctancy of whether to go into the process. Management of local company, I'm talking mainly about private company. It's much more complicated than it's done in Israel. In Israel, it's seamless. You don't actually have to do nothing. You just have to let the company work. In India, still there are many procedural requirements, annual reports, quarterly reports. You have to employ an Indian director. You have to make some kind of agreement with that, employment agreement with the director. Again, it's a work, and it's a little more complicated than want to use in Israel. In Israel, I can register the company in one day, and the next day I can hit the road with that. Transfer of money, still it's an issue, both ways. Also to bring money into India, sometimes can take even 2 months. And when you have a subsidiary there, you want to give them capital and money to work, it may take some time. Securing IP. Securing IP, I don't think it's a real issue. I think that you can secure your IP in India, but still there are some cases from the past when the IP rules were not as enforceable as they are today, that there was some kind of a perception that you are not totally secure, your IP is not totally secured in India. We have to work out together to see how to stop this rumor. Okay, there were some cases now that Israeli companies see that their IP has been copied and so on. Now, bear in mind that, at least from the Israeli perception, the main thing that we bring into India is our technology. I mean, Israel, it's a very small country. We cannot bring lots of capital or human resources or things like that. We are bringing into our Indian activity mainly the technology and know-how. And naturally, you want to secure it, that it will not become a public domain. And also the dispute resolution mechanisms. Again, I'm not concerned about going to any Indian institute like court or to go under the Indian Arbitration Act and so on. But there are some perception, not coming necessarily from Israel, that this better should be done in an external entity like SIAC or like ACC or things like that. The other things is, for example, process of closing a company. In Israel, you can close the company in 2 weeks. In India, it's a much longer process. And if you cannot undo something, you think twice before you do it for the first place. So this is also something that we have to, when we start into the process, we have to see how we can cancel it, because not all ventures are successful. And sometimes you don't want to have an entity which is not active, especially out of your domain, out of your region. The last few points are mainly relates to taxation, to taxes. The exposure to a permanent establishment in India, it's a really concern. It's a real concern for my clients, because it's very tricky. The Indian tax authorities are very smart, and they know how to create, sometimes post-mortem, the existence of such a PE, and nobody wants to have a PE if it is not real, in the sense that in India you can have a PE even without your activity there, and once you have it there, it creates exposure to tax obligations in India, even to activity which has not been carried out in India. So this is also something that we are dealing very carefully, and it's like walking in a landmine, area. Very, and when you are cooperating with us, try to understand this is a real concern from our side. Everything has to be documented, any relation. It creates lots of constraints on our activity there, days of people who can be there. Now, since I think July, there is a double exposure, because of course the Indian entity is a permanent establishment by definition, but also now you can have both the mother company from Israel and the Indian entity, both can have separate PE in India. This is something that creates lots of concern, because by the end of the day, we want to have the money in our account in the mother company. We invest in India in order to make some ROI back. And this is something that is really a threat on that. There is also some kind of unclarity about taxation. Sometimes you can be surprised, not in the beginning, but in the end of the game. In Israel, there is a pre-ruling mechanism you can get. It takes time, but you can get some kind of a commitment from the tax authority what will going to be your tax bill in the end of the year or in the end of the venture. In India, from my understanding, it's not like that. So bear in mind that we're going to be very precautions about all the taxations. We want to share the risk with the Indian side. This is something that we feel we feel uncomfortable with. And when you feel uncomfortable with something, you want to share the risk with somebody who knows it better than you. And in this case is the Indian side. Again, tax on dividends. Only recently, there was some kind of the DDT was cancelled, but before that, it creates lots of issues. Actually, the practical tax that you have to pay on dividend from the moment it has been distributed by the company, including the tax that the company was supposed to pay, but actually it's from the same money till you got the money in Israel. Altogether, it was close to 60%. This does not make India as a very attractive place for investment. Now it's a little ease, but still we have to do some very intelligent, of course legal, but and legitimate, but tax planning, because nobody wants to make any venture and to risk his money investments, and then he knows that anyway 60% will go to taxes either in Israel or in India. This is a issue. The same about the withholding tax. It's quite cumbersome to get that money back in Israel, and we are trying to find ways to minimize the kind of payments and returns which are exposed to withholding tax. Of course, I'm a lawyer. I'm talking only about legal things. And now there is some new rules about the cap of the royalties that you can take on your technology and license fees that was even before, and transfer prices. All these things creating all the mechanism of investment very, very challenging. And I think that if both parties want this to be successful, they have to understand our concern, I would say, stomachache and headaches about it, and work together to find it out. The deals that were most successful to us, from my experience, was when the Indian side put himself in our shoes in those issues, and together we could find solutions to that. And not just say, okay, this is the problem of the investor, because if the investor will come and see, the investor can be also the owner of a technology that we like to develop in India and so on. But if I understand that what I'm putting in, I'll get back only 40% of the return I think this will create an issue.
Hi, Mr. Grossman. Yes, thank you so much for sharing all those great points with us and for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just before we let you go, Mr. Grossman, would you please let us know one thing that that you look forward to changing or getting better in 2021 now going forward for businesses, especially when we speak of Israel and India?
Yes, first of all, we all want to believe that 2021 will be much better than 2020. Although we are now in the end of 2020, I think it was not as bad as we thought it will be. Deals happen. I think this is like any crisis, shows the strength of the relations between the two countries. You know that Churchill said once, you cannot afford to waste a good crisis. So crises are always good for relations. And this shows the strength of relations. Just now, these days, we have delegations in the Aero India in Bangalore. Actually, I was supposed to be there, but then because of COVID, I gave up and I stayed in Israel. But then we can see I think that the stream of deals will go ahead. It's a little more complicated because things that you can do in few hours in a meeting, now you have to spend 2 days on the Zoom. And then you have to recharge your AirPods like a few times a day. But I think that this strength of relations will enable us to go ahead more strongly in 2021. In Israel, at least, we are talking about getting off the lockdown within 2 or 3 weeks. We already vaccinated very like 50% of the population. So we will be able to come to India. I think it's going to be, we understand the importance of relationships in this 2020, and I think 2021 and 2022 will be very promising. And we have a lot of work to do in order to make it happen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Grossman, and I'm sure things would improve. And as you said, we'll keep looking up and be more promising. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Grossman, and thank you, Ashima.